we define advertising? And how does it work? Simon Anderson, Commonwealth Professor of Economics from University of Virginia, talks about the ins and outs of the advertising industry in a world of limited resources. In a forthcoming video, we'll look at some ideas for regulations to protect biodiversity.
I'm Simon Anderson, Commonwealth Professor of Economics at the University of Virginia, where I've been teaching and researching since 1987.
Henri Palma, I am teaching at Paris-Cergy University. I am Professor of Economics, and we are here to discuss a little bit about advertising and the role of advertising with respect to climate change. Okay, welcome Simon. We are very happy to have you here. And we were wondering if you could speak a little bit about advertising. Why advertising? Because, of course, it's related to consumption, and consumption is related to climate change. So we are going to discuss a little bit about climate change, but we would like to understand how advertising works. So I start with a very simple question, which is, if some bird tries to seduce another bird, can we speak about advertising? And more generally, can you in a few words define what you mean by advertising?
Yes, thanks for the imagery there. I was just wondering, as you were saying that, depends which species you are, whether it's the male or the female that's actually doing what you're thinking of as advertising, which you have a broader definition than we would normally. We normally think of it as an action that leads to a purchase. But if you define more broadly, I guess some aim of one of the parties here, not necessarily a purchase, maybe it could be to do good deeds, as you hear on the radio sometimes, in charitable work, etc. So it doesn't always have to be about money. So thank you for that broadening of our thoughts there. So you were asking about advertising with your background story. And that would be indeed to induce behavior that leads, okay, let's talk about the economics that leads to a purchase. Which it could be information about a product for sale, or it could be more ephemeral, some sort of persuasion activity that convinces the subject or an individual to buy the product that's being advertised. Or indeed sometimes actually negative advertising is convincing people not to buy the product. These could be what in economics are sometimes called demerit goods, like you may do negative the government may do negative advertising on alcohol or cigarettes or fentanyl, what have you.
Okay, I see. So it's a very broad definition. We will come back to that, but we may say, what a world without advertising, in the sense that the advertising industry use many people for many functions. So how many, more or less, are making a living from advertising? And what does it represent in terms of business, and in terms of, we go back a little bit to our topic, energy consumed, if there are some figure, maybe there are none, and the usual thing, number of trees, okay? I read, I don't know if it is true, that if Chinese would make as much advertising than US, they would cut all the forests in the world. Because as you know, this represents a certain number of trees for each individual. So maybe you can tell more about these two facets, the industry and the resource used by advertising.
Okay, starting with the industry, it will depend, as you said, by country, very much so. With advanced developed countries such as the US, maybe the prime example, the largest one has something like 2.25% of GDP in advertising. spending in advertising. We may come back at some point and talk about the goods and bads of that, hold that one for a little bit later. But you might, just prefatory statement on that, looking forward, it's arguably the tip of a much larger iceberg, that the advertising facilitates faster innovation of products, bringing them to market quicker, generating innovation as well, fostering that, and unemployment. So it could be a much larger iceberg that is facilitated or even implemented because of the advertising. Depending on your viewpoint, that I've taken the very, exaggerated it probably in the positive sense of what the good things that the advertising does. But we can also think about possibly the bad sides of advertising when it's not a good thing. Maybe we'll come to that one a bit later. As I try and remember the rest of your question, it was the Chinese. Yeah, so actually I was interested you talk about paper. So I thought, as they say, kids now, I don't know if the new generations aren't reading paper anymore very much. I don't know. They might just still remember what a newspaper is. They're not reading, they're reading zines or something. They're reading online. So it's probably not about paper anymore.
In the main box, they still put some.
Presumably less and less. I mean, you might want to be talking about how much energy is burned up sending the modern media. Are no longer magazines and newspapers so much, or even radio and television. They're the social media, they are the websites that are financed, that are there because of the advertising. That speaks to what I was just talking about, that the advertising is somehow, it's actually not only by bringing or causing new goods to be able to be brought to market by telling people about them. Again, rosy view. But it's also financing, it's underwriting the media, it's underwriting the websites. These companies that are worth, we now hear Apple is worth nearly $3 trillion. It came down a little bit, but I looked at the figures yesterday for France. And if every Frenchman worked for a year, the French GDP is less than the value of Apple. Right. The UK is slightly better, but it gives you some idea how big that particular company is, right? I guess advertising finance plays less of a role in Apple's business model, although quite a few apps are advertising finance, but many of these platform industries, the big seven, for example, have something. Google, for example, Google search, that's advertising finance. It's the money from advertising that enables us to have not only that one, but the social media. Well, plus they're selling your data as well. It came out from time to time.
We were wondering why an economic professor is interested in advertising, because for us it's more marketing. And can you summarize maybe what economics has to say about advertising and why they are interested in this topic?
Economists like to think that they can do, that everything is economics and that economists can do everything. Somewhat the arrogance of economists, but I think advertising is actually close to economics and close to marketing. In fact, we have a conference that I co-run with some other people on the economics of advertising and marketing, which brings together prominent contributors in the fields of marketing, as well as in empirical industrial organization, and some people from the industry side, some people from, we have the chief economist from Pandora, for example. So that's a nice thing to bring people together, and I always thought of that as really a lot of what's going on in economics, at least in my side of industrial organization, thinking about information. Well, advertising is the natural way of communicating about products, given you and I, now I think of it, have worked a lot on characteristics and product differentiation, and advertising has a very strong role in that. Sometimes we thought of as actually fostering spurious product differentiation.
But when we hear all the time the same advertising, we wonder if it is information. So are there different type of advertising? Informative, yes. I don't know product I hear, but are there other type of advertising?
I was going to mention the, what do they call them? The 4 Ps of marketing. This is a very marketing speak that they will name something like that. 4 principles. It's price and place and product and promotion. And when I heard about these, which I think I heard of from you, you wrote a book about marketing, que sais-je,
and there is
marketing.
A 5th,
oh no.
packaging.
Oh, okay. Well, that's in some sense advertising for what's in there.
Okay.
So I realized in microeconomics I've been doing marketing for years because pricing is central in economics. Promotion is the advertising. Place is location theory, which we think of, also we can think of as a product as having a place, a location in a space of characteristics. It's a design feature, and also a feature that can be advertised by firms if they're trying to extol the virtues of a product by appealing to people's desire to consume several features, so they can talk about those things. So all of this is intertwined together.
But that's the economist's point of view.
That's me.
Is the other side of advertising, like, in a sense, advertising speaks to the rational man and to the irrational man. And we are both rational and irrational. If I have an impulse purchase, okay, I am not rational. I look somebody I buy, and this brings me to sub-question is that we know that we buy a lot of good that we don't use, or we use just a few functions of this good. We know that we buy clothes, we throw away clothes, we buy food, and 30% of the food that we buy are thrown. So can we say it's the fault of advertising or not? Because we don't want to be unfair, we want to understand what is going on. What would you say?
At the beginning you bring up this nice question about the rationality of people, and actually that's one reason why economists are sometimes queasy and leery about trying to think about advertising, because we use a way of thinking of consumers as choosing rationally and choosing sensibly, and yet advertising sometimes seems to be veering into changing people's perceptions or changing people's tastes of products. And the economists then worry about, well, how can we think about actually making that fit and concur with this rational behavior that you mentioned. But the Chicago economists came up to the challenge, and there's a couple of Nobel Prize winners who have actually dealt with that subject, along with, I think, something equally bizarre like rational drug addiction. They managed to rationalize that. Again, economics can do everything, explain any phenomena you wish, and so they took on that challenge. But you were talking later there in your question about, bad advertising?
Clothes you buy
away. Yeah.
and you don't use, impulse good, or food, because you see a big box, you think it's cheaper, and you don't use it. And statistically, if it is correct, I don't know, but 30% of the food, and we are catching you in Europe, is thrown. Okay, so is advertising guilty, or is human nature, or not the way it goes? What can we say?
Well, first of all, impulse buying. I usually think of impulse buying as more with the house husband at the checkout counter with a screaming child pointing at the chewing gum or something. So the impulse didn't there have much to do with, except perhaps insofar as the advertising got to the child on the children's television, and that's why they're pointing at the particular chocolate bar. So I was going to say impulse buying doesn't seem much to do with advertising, but now I'm thinking maybe it does too.
I can interrupt you 1 second.
Yeah, you obviously want to.
When they opened a bon marché in France, they could not attract people. It was very difficult. And then they realized they don't have to attract men, they have to attract women. And then they realized it's much better to attract children. So they shoot at children, and children go with the women, and they Persian, and this was a very good marketing idea. Now, you can say it's manipulation, not necessarily. And do you buy what you don't need, or you like variety? And this is, can we say that the marketing and the advertising is guilty because you have such a desire to have this good and you feel bad because you have not this good, or it's human nature?
Right, right. I was thinking of the McDonald's and the Happy Meal. They know who the decision maker is and they target them beautifully well. Yes, I just iterate, I said so many arguably good things about advertising, facilitating so much of the economy, and informing, helping. But of course you want to think about the bad side, and I think the textile industry, the fashion industry has been, was pilloried in The Economist magazine for a large amount of waste, that people buy these things and then they put them in the closet, then a year later they go to this desert in Chile you were telling me about.
Atacama.
Okay, which is the graveyard for dead etro clothes or whatever it is that people brought on some impulse. I don't know so much to what extent that was. That brings me to thinking about, so what bad sides of advertising could there be? And there could be insofar as the advertising induces people to buy things that they may not want afterwards. As you say, that's maybe a lack of foresight. It's an example maybe of behavioral bias of some sort, of buying these large box items you were saying. To what extent the advertising fosters that, I would be, or whether it's some other deeper felt thing that makes you want to buy the big size. But certainly the fashion industry has been blamed for sort of creating these ephemeral wants that then people get the jacket home and they don't want to wear it anymore. There's so one aspect of advertising we didn't mention is maybe this idea that people want to get fashionable clothes because they want to project some image or they want to fit in. Why it might be that when they get home they don't want to wear it is another question. That has come up. The idea of coordination on particular styles. You might say, well, on the one hand, if people like doing this or like to think that they're going to want this, then it's a good thing. You're taking the sort of economist view of, if I did it, I must have wanted to, but that's the rational thing you're questioning there. Or indeed, you might say, well, it's a bit of an empty life if you're enjoying these things, but maybe that's too paternalistic an attitude to say that they shouldn't be enjoying wearing similar clothes as each other. I don't know.
So there is some regulation concerning advertising, and there are several reasons to have regulation. Okay, advertising for cigarette near school, or advertising for some good for some kind of people, and so on. So do you think that the regulation is not strict enough? And we return to our original topic, knowing we are a world with limited resource. Do you think that some regulation should be reinforced, and what kind of regulation would be realistically possible? Because we can write a model and say we want this regulation, but realistically, since you are in contact with the industry, what kind of regulation they could accept? And maybe we can have a win-win, because there is a little vicious circle, is that if I do advertising, you are obliged to do advertising. So maybe if the regulators say do less, you do less, and so on. So we want to hear you about that.
Yes, that's a nice one you brought up at the end there. I think when the tobacco companies were banned from advertising effectively, then they recorded windfall profits. That's the old story that the advertising there just reshuffles the market between them. So if you take away that ability to compete on that, then they just make more money. But the cigarettes, for example, are banned, I think, on almost every television in every nation, advertising for cigarettes, alcohol. You see negative advertising regulated on cigarette packs when they show you these horrible pictures of what happens to you if you smoke. So there is also negative advertising that can be regulated in some sense like that, and or underwritten by governments that they put on or can pay for advertisements as public service announcements. There's regulation to carry so many of those on radio in the US, for example. Children's television, you can't advertise a lot of things. Regulations on children's advertising to children. Especially things like cigarettes, etc. Camel, I think the cigarettes were accused of targeting things that would be appealing to children, gifts with it, and I think that was viewed badly. So those regulations on the type of products that can be advertised, the amount of screen time you can spend advertising on children's programs, even the Americans are regulating that. They don't regulate the advertising in other channels. Commercial broadcasting channels, but children's advertising does have a cap. And of course Europe has a cap on the advertising as well, and on the types of products. Come to think of it, I did read through, or I saw the documents for, I was in Australia at the time, but the documents, regulation on advertising, are great thick booklets. And then if we think, and that's in Australia, if we think about the EU, there's the EU Directive 97 that regulates all of the advertising in all the countries over and above or tighter than the individual countries' norms. And that's very big because it has to define all the different types of advertising and how many minutes you can and what products are advertised, etc. So that's something that is done to whether it's excessive or not enough. The channels are there for being able to do it.
So maybe you can have some suggestion of regulation that you think are missing with respect to le gaspillage, with respect to scarce resource. Is there some simple idea you could suggest?
In some level, I would be reluctant to ban all the Prada advertisements in Vogue or Gentleman's Quarterly. Let's try and be equal amongst the genders here. I would be reluctant to ban things like that because a lot of people get a lot of enjoyment out of that. I'm not sure. I know we just spoke about how much waste there is involved there. Hard to know what else we could do about that. We could be, I don't know, possible to, I guess the companies involved don't want you to recycle those products. Then the exclusivity would be gone, the ability to charge, what did I see recently, $10,000 for a Louis Vuitton handbag or something like that. And there's more expensive things out there as well. So I don't have a great suggestion for that. I'm not sure how big the problem is. I know it's one that's brought up, this textile example. I don't know if this is the most pressing angle on climate change that needs attention. I don't know that advertising's role in that is the most pressing thing that we should be informing people about. Okay, fine that we make them more aware that, do you really want to buy that jacket? Because most people actually don't end up wearing them. Maybe you can make them think more about it. But I think you probably have more ideas where efforts should be spent in order to get public awareness up about the overall problems of the climate and what we're doing to it. Got to think fashion may be a smaller part, but I don't know. I haven't looked at those figures. Tell the truth.
So, have you a conclusion?
Well, Advertising per se, I think I'm hearing myself saying that it has a lot of desirable features in spreading information, although of course we know in our previous work on information congestion there can be way too much advertising, too much noise coming in that people have to filter out. You mentioned repetition and wasteful ads. That's all. I will support that. I think that's true. But then again, we've got to think that the advertising is underwriting a lot of the activity on the web. And as well, it used to be commercial television was financed just by advertising. And commercial radio, and now websites and Google search and social media, etc. So that's in some sense where one aspect of it that's arguably a great. You can complain about how good or bad job the website sectors or social media do or don't do, or television programming, etc. But be aware that that's there, along with maybe fostering the enjoyment of certain types of products that maybe gives us some social concerns there, that advertising may focus too little diversity or things like that. But tell the truth to repeat. I don't see, there's bigger targets to aim at when in climate change awareness than advertising that I'm aware of.
Thank you very much. We thank you very much to be here, to come from such a long way to Sergi. And have a good afternoon.
Thank you very much indeed.